Michigan. Good old Michigan. It's the home of the, I don't know, the Wolverines, the Spartans, all your Detroit teams. I've lived here my whole life, and we've had quite a long road in Michigan when it comes to marijuana policy and marijuana everything to do with marijuana. And you know, when you're talking about the fight to have a just system of marijuana laws in Michigan, or whatever you want to call it, I don't know. I don't know too many states that have gone through what we have gone through. Now, maybe there is. Maybe I just only hear the stories because I'm local and I hear the stories here. And I'm sure there is. And I'm not discounting any of those stories. But these are the stories from Michigan. This is where we are. This is where we started. And yeah, I'm gonna run through a lot of stuff, so this might be a long video. But on a quick note, I can just tell you the order of events. All right, we had John Sinclair. John Sinclair got arrested for possession of 2 joints, sentenced to 10 years. That kicked off a party where John Lennon basically came to a party, and it was pretty much after that John Sinclair was released, and that kicked off 40 years, or 40 plus years I should say, of the hash bash. This is an old article. And then you had the Rainbow Farm incident, and now you have several municipalities decriminalizing marijuana throughout the decades. This, again, that article is kind of a couple years old, but we'll still use it. We have Michigan voters approving the medical marijuana measure by a landslide, 63% in 2008. But oh, what a sordid, short history of medical marijuana we have in Michigan. And I will go through a timeline detailing all the events that have happened since the law was passed in 2008. And again, this is only up to 2013, I think. So, and then we have a couple of important court rulings. People versus Carruthers, which determined that basically an edible containing THC extract from marijuana resin is not usable marijuana under the law. We had another important court ruling in 2013. That one was also in 2013. So in 2013, another court ruling determined that marijuana dispensaries that handle patient-to-patient sales are not protected under the state's medical marijuana laws. And that set the stage for years and years of busts, to the degree that marijuana arrests increased from 2008's number of 21,419, and it just kind of stayed above that number. It never made it back down to that number. And as soon, as recent as 2015, where we had 23,893 arrests. So, yeah, and then in 2015, we heard about these different people that were trying to legalize marijuana. One of them being a Republican group called the Michigan Responsibility Council. And they wanted to create a system that would take over the entire wholesale market for marijuana distribution. Quote, "It would be similar, as I'm reading it, to Michigan's alcohol distribution system," Naher said. MRC's proposal is similar to bills in the state legislature that would create protections for dispensaries and non-smokable forms of cannabis. Then what happened was My Legalize in 2016 attempted to do a petition drive to legalize marijuana, churned in enough signatures, but 137,000 of the signatures apparently got thrown away because they weren't gathered in this 180-day window that they created out of this rule from 1986 that was only supposed to be used for things that were applied to the Constitution, I believe, or there was some stipulation, and it wasn't really a rule that they should have done. So then in 2016, later that year, not too much later, but, right before the election of 2016, which would have been where the legalizing marijuana would have got on the ballot, and after about 11 months of saying that they were going to come up with laws to handle the situation with dispensaries and medibles and extracts, finally the legislator came out with rules for the medical marijuana system known as the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, which we found out was written by lobbyists. And if it wasn't already written by lobbyists, there was also the implementation rules that were also written by lobbyists. So, and one of the things we found out about the lobbyists is that they were basically the same Republicans that ran Michigan Responsibility Council. In fact, they're still there. Here's a list of the lobbyists right here. Here's Michigan Responsibility Council. We also have Michigan Legislative Consultants. Much more is in here a couple times. Candler, Reed, Corey, and much more. So these are people that are trying to do the corporate takeover of the medical marijuana industry. Basically wrote the rules to legislate out the caregivers and the old dispensaries that used to be here. And we're seeing the results of that now. This was way back in October of 2017, but now we're seeing the blood is about to be shed, and the transition from the old dispensaries to the corporate ones is about to happen. So then in 2017, after taking their case to the Supreme Court in Michigan and losing, My Legalize, the petition drive that was screwed over in that 2016 situation, decided that they were gonna, go all in with the coalition, which was a coalition of people in Michigan, including My Legalize, Michigan Normal, Marijuana Law Section of the State Bar Association, the ACLU, Drug Policy Alliance, Marijuana Policy Project, and other businesses, interest, and trade organizations. And then we have marijuana legalization ballot drive launched in Michigan, finally. And this was in May of 2017, and then we had Michigan approves marijuana legalization vote for November. Here we are now, as Michigan businesses pour cash into the anti-marijuana legalization campaign. And then finally, we have a story about how retired Michigan cops say legal marijuana would help police community relations. Quote, "This is a financial interest that these police and prosecutors have that they never mention to the public," a retired officer said. "It's policing for profit." So this article kind of addresses some of the things about, police taking the power away from you when they smell weed on you and search you and basically take all your rights away, confiscate all your goods. It addresses the forfeiture issue in Michigan, which is one of the worst states in the country for forfeiture. Has the worst forfeiture laws. And yeah, so I went through that pretty fast, but we're going to go back through it real slow now. And I have certain segments of this video here that we're going to watch about the situation with John Sinclair getting arrested for marijuana. And then we'll go from there.
We are neither morally nor legally confined to those laws. Those laws that keep them up keep us down. You got to begin to understand that.
John Sinclair was put away for 10 years for possessing 2 marijuana joints. He spent 2 years of it in prison, virtually in isolation, in solitary.
John Sinclair is best known as the 60s marijuana activist who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for giving 2 joints to an undercover policewoman. He was eventually freed when John Lennon and Yoko Ono spoke out on his behalf.
Yeah, Jesus, I hate to even think about that. It's just such a depressing thing.
We're waiting here for you to get out.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm waiting to come out, you know. They passed that bill yesterday, and I think that it's going to happen, you know? It's going to happen. It's got to. People are just too deep into it. I'm too excited. I'm shaking. I don't know what to say. I just want to come home.
The hippie movement had become a mass movement by then. College students were hippies. When I went to prison in '69, college students were squares. They were frat boys and football players and drinkers and squares, short hairs, you know. And when I came out 2.5 years later, they were all hippies. It was just kind of mind-boggling. But my people have been trying to tell me this, you know. Of course, I'm in a prison with a bunch of criminals. Not a hippie in sight, you know. Because they weren't sending hippies to prison then, yet. Pretty much. You pretty much had to have committed a crime. That's why I stood out for my sentence, because it was obvious that they nailed me on some technicality for a bigger crime with which they couldn't charge me. Sedition or treason or whatever, you know. I'm very proud of this because I was very intimately involved, not only with my own defense, but also as the chairman of our party. And if you look in my archives at the University of Michigan Bentley Historical Library, you'll find reams of letters. I wrote 7 single-space typewritten pages home every night for 2.5 years. You know, the thing I hate about this whole thing is it comes down in history that I was this terrible victim. But I wasn't really a victim. I just looked at this as part of my job. If you're going to be a revolutionary, you were going to have to go to prison. And I had a beautiful support system, and my wife, Lenny, and my brother, David, were key members of the organization. So I was buoyed and held up by these people that I worked with, you know, who worked ceaselessly to get me out, ceaselessly. And part of it being rock and rollers. Of course, the MC5 had defected just before I went to prison, and they decided they didn't want to do this anymore. Certainly their prerogative.
Dig out the jails, motherfucker!
So every week, virtually, for 2.5 years, there was some kind of rock and roll benefit in my behalf, whether it drew 100 people or 1,000 people. And all the little money that came, they would give it to us, and we'd give it to the lawyers, or use it for survival of the group.
Oh, dear John Sinclair, we celebrate your liberty tonight.
We organized the biggest event we had ever done. And a friend of ours was now working for the University of Michigan as the head of their office of major events, trying to teach them how to put on rock and roll shows and make money with them. Whereas when I was out there, we used to have to sue the University of Michigan every time we wanted to put the MC5 in one of their facilities. Well, now they realized that it was going to be big business, so they hired Peter M. Andrews to show them how to do it. Well, because of this, he had access to the university facilities. And through some miracle, we formed a student organization, and we rented the basketball arena, 14,400-seat Chrysler Arena, to put on a show to free John Sinclair on December 10th, 1971. In the course of organizing, trying to attract people that would draw a huge crowd, because we had to get a huge crowd to show that, you know, it was a political thing. You know, you had to show that you were winning in order to win. And in the course of it, we had a miracle happen. Our friend Jerry Rubin had become close with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and he suggested to them that he was going to Ann Arbor to play. He told them about my case, and he said he was coming to Ann Arbor to play on my behalf, and maybe they'd like to come too. And I said maybe we would, and they did.
We came here not only to help John and to spotlight what's going on, but also to show and to say to all of you that apathy isn't it, and that we can do something. This song I wrote for John Sinclair. 1, 2, 3, 4. It ain't fair, John Sinclair, in the step of breathing air. Won't you care for John Sinclair, in the step of breathing air? Let him be, set him free, let him be like you and me. I gave him 10 for 2, what else can Judge Columba do? We got to set him free. If he was a soldier man, shooting gooks in Vietnam, if he was the CIA, selling dope and making hay, he'd be free, they'd let him be, breathing air like you and me. They gave him 10 for 2, what else can Judge Columba do? Was he jailed for what he done, or representing everyone? Free John now, if he can, from the clutches of the man. Let him be, lift the lid, bring him to his wife and kids. Alright, they gave him 10 for 2, what else can the bastard do? We got to set him free, free.
And all of a sudden, everybody was on my side. It was the most beautiful and rapid, swift transformation. And after that, the things did, you know, he wrote a song for me. He came and played at the headline this big show. And 3 days later, they let me out on appeal bond, which was a very mythological situation. Yeah. I mean, apart from the personal effect on me, the happiest moment of my life, by far. And I've had a lot of happiness. Don't get me wrong.
Hello?
John, okay, here's John. You're on tape now.
Yeah. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hello, John?
Yeah.
Great. So there you are, right?
Right.
Here we are.
Really?
Great.
Yes, yes.
So what happened?
I don't know, man. They just told me to go.
It's beautiful. Great.
That thing, you know, I did it, man.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, the Supreme Court of the state of Michigan, man, they granted a bond on their own motion.
Beautiful.
They made it up themselves.
Great. Very clever of them.
Yeah, that's right.
It's great, isn't it?
How's Yoko?
Oh, she's fine. They
Yeah.
used her.
Oh, good, very good.
Hello, John.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Well, look, we're so glad, and it really gave us hope and everything.
Oh,
I mean, you know, it became like history, right?
really? I heard you on the radio.
Well, because it gave us all an incentive, you see. The people in New York and all that were very down mood, you know, when we came here.
Yeah.
And, you know, we felt like this large generation is over and
Right.
nothing's going to happen, right?
Right.
But we can start all over again, right?
It's beautiful. It was a victory, man, just like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's never too late to start.
That that was called White Panther: The Legacy of John Sinclair. It was a documentary, and I'll provide the link in the description below. So, you know, after all the hoopla, the party was the Hash Bash, and in Michigan, the legalization movement basically kind of is defined by the Hash Bash, being a part of it for the last, you know, over almost 50 years. It was started the same year I was born, so it's easy to keep track of. But anyway, let's go ahead and check this out. Well, it started in 1972. Technically, so did I. I started in December of 1971. So when John Sinclair, we're going to read this here by Ryan Stanton of the Ann Arbor News. When John Lennon came to Chrysler Arena in December 1971 to headline the now famous Free John Now benefit concert, Ann Arbor poet and activist John Sinclair was about a quarter of the way through serving a 10-year prison sentence for possession of 2 joints. 3 days after the rally, Sinclair was released from prison after the Michigan Supreme Court ruled the state's marijuana statutes were unconstitutional. I went to prison for 2.5 years to overthrow the old laws. Sinclair, 69, recalled during an interview this week. And just a pause here really quick to let you guys know that this article was posted on March 31st, 2011. Yeah, it's 40 years of hash bash. So this is a pretty old article. But anyway. And my appeal succeeded in establishing that marijuana was not a narcotic and that 10 years for possession was a cruel and unusual punishment. Sinclair, who lived in Ann Arbor from 1968 to 75 and now splits his time between Amsterdam and Detroit, became a marijuana martyr of sorts, and his case helped fuel a movement. On April 1st, 1972, Stoners united on the University of Michigan Diag in Ann Arbor for the first Hash Bash, a countercultural cannabis celebration now in its 40th year. Quote, "We kind of wanted to have the Hash Bash to defy this law," Sinclair recalled, adding that's when the state reclassified marijuana as a controlled substance and lowered the penalties from possession from 10 years to 1 year, for sales from 20 to life to 4 years. Quote, "We didn't think that was far enough." Sinclair and others got behind 2 candidates from the Human Rights Party who were elected to the Ann Arbor City Council in April of 1972. They quickly spearheaded an effort to reduce the city penalty for possession of small amounts of marijuana to a $5 civil infraction, essentially decriminalizing weed in Ann Arbor. That remains the case today, except it's now a $25 ticket for the first offense. Quote, "That totally changed the scene in Ann Arbor to the point that I know people who used to walk up to cops and try to get a ticket written, and you couldn't even get a cop to write the $5 ticket," said Adam Brook, organizer of the Hash Bash, for around 20 years. Well, maybe a little bit longer than that. In its prime, the word-of-mouth gathering attracted more than 10,000 participants, but attendance at Hash Bash has varied over the years, and I would have to say it still averages around 5,000. I mean, I've been there at least two out of the last three. So, hash bash over the years. Chuck Ream, Ann Arbor cannabis activist and medical marijuana dispensary owner, said he was at the first hash bash in 1972 and has been to just about every one since. And for the record, I've been to a lot of them since. The first one I went to, I think, was in 1986. And, yeah, I've been to a lot of them. So Chuck Ream came to Ann Arbor in the fall of 1970 to get his master's degree in counseling at the U of M. Quote, "The hash bash is a celebration of the culture that we formed in the late 60s that was based on love rather than materialism," Ream said. It laid out a way that humans could adapt and survive on the planet and live in a joyful and sustainable way, and cannabis is the substance of that counterculture because cannabis makes you live in the now. Ream said hash bash probably would have died out in the 1980s if not for activist Rick Burkett, who kept it together and pulling in High Times magazine. Brooke arrived on the scene in the late 80s and assumed the lead role in organizing and emceeing the event. He said hash bash has evolved into more of a political rally. Quote, "The rally became much more a political thing in the 90s, where in the 70s and 80s it was a party," said Brooke, who lives in the Royal Oak today. Brooke said hash bash came under attack in the 1990s when U of M launched its own police force and began aggressively enforcing state marijuana laws on campus. Quote, "You have to understand that hash bash is a smoke-in. People are going there to smoke a joint," Brooke said. "Now, why do you warn people that it's not the place to smoke a joint? Well, because the university now has their own police force, and they'll arrest you for smoking a joint, and that's how hash bash has changed. But for years, we didn't even need a permit. All you had to do was show up at the Diag, smoke weed. It wasn't a problem." And I would, like I said, this article's pretty old, and I'm stepping in here to say that in the last couple of hash bashes I've been to, people straight smoke up, no questions asked. I mean, I seen people straight up sitting there with their table from their house on the sidewalk, or on the floor of the Diag where it's paved, just doing dabs and hitting 3-foot glass bongs and shit. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's going on at the Diag as far as enforcement of smoking. And since I've been a little kid going to the hash bash, I've seen a lot of people at the hash bash get arrested for alcohol. Like, I mean, not every year. It's only like a few every year. But it happens. Alcohol is one of the ways that you get arrested at the hash bash. Dispensary owner Chuck Ream, there's a picture of him right there. Sinclair said the original goal of hash bash was total legalization, and he's still hoping to see that happen in his lifetime. For now, he's a state-registered medical marijuana patient, as so am I. He speaks proudly of his legacy in the marijuana movement, and he's hopeful the culture will continue to shift toward an attitude of tolerance. Quote, "They need to get rid of this idiotic, hypocritical war on drugs. Marijuana, there's nothing wrong with it," he said. "It doesn't harm anybody. It's not a dangerous substance, and millions of people use it. And they're just characterized as criminals by these people whose drug of choice is alcohol. So the first thing you get rid of is this tremendous hypocrisy." Ream marvels at how far Ann Arbor has come. Even in the last year, he said, attitudes have continued to change and the city officials have visited dispensaries and have left impressed. I don't know if you can see this. Let me see if we can get it in a new tab here. But we have this old picture of the hash bash back in, like, I think it was 1978. Still a great party. There's this party called the Monroe Street Fair that's right there too. So it's yeah, it's pretty excellent. And now I'm gonna go right into this right here. So I recently did a video about this. This is the next stop along the way in Michigan's fight to get where we are now. Because I'll just kind of, the 80s was like, that was, I grew up in the 80s, kind of, I was like a teenager in the mid 80s, and the drug war was in full effect. Cheech and Chong movies were pretty popular, and people were getting their doors kicked right in for weed, smoking weed, growing weed. It was the Ronald Reagan drug war in full effect with Just Say No and Dare and all that stuff. The whole 9 yards. The Satanic Panic, you name it. The whole we were in full force, like, insanity mode. And it didn't get much better when Bill Clinton came around. I remember that, because I do remember that California legalized medical marijuana under Bill Clinton's watch, and dispensaries were getting raided under Clinton. So whatever, but we go all the way to 2001 where this incident happened. And I'm going to go ahead and run this video from a clip that came out from News Channel 3 since, and this is West Michigan, since I've made my video about Rainbow Farm. And they have this interesting collection of documents from the case here. So I'm going to leave a link to this article here in the description below. But we're going to go ahead and watch this video. So buckle in. I think it's about 5 minutes or maybe a little bit longer. And this is the story of Rainbow Farm kind of summed up real quick. And the son of one of the people that got murdered at Rainbow Farm, Raleigh Rahm's son, or Roland Rahm.
Welcome back to News Channel 3 Live at 5 on this Wednesday evening. I'm Andy Dominiani.
And I'm Kate Tillotson. A standoff that happened in West Michigan 17 years ago is being made into a movie.
Yeah, that standoff involved a campground called Rainbow Farm, initially known for celebrating marijuana and music, but later becoming notorious for bloodshed.
And tonight, News Channel 3's investigative reporter Cody Combs speaks to those at the center of that deadly standoff.
And we're still looking for a peaceful resolution to this situation.
Police have been in a standoff with Tom Crossland since yesterday.
I can hear where Tom's coming from as a fellow American citizen.
The consequences and government's actions are being questioned by some.
Give him some time and space, because they're going to push him too far.
These were the last sights and sounds many Michiganders remember of Rainbow Farm. Owner Tom Crossland and his partner Roland Rahm had set fire to the camp in September of 2001. For years prior, Rainbow Farm hosted various musical acts, also hosting events dubbed Hemp Aid, gathering signatures to legalize marijuana, which was used openly at the campground. But law enforcement said marijuana and other drugs like heroin and LSD crossed a line, prompting the state to try to take the land and take Roland Rahm's then 12-year-old son, Robert.
Robert, how are you?
Doing good, Cody. How about yourself?
He's speaking about the whole ordeal for the first time since it happened 17 years ago, vividly remembering being taken away from his dad.
Caseworker comes in and says there's two police cars outside waiting, and are you going to ride with me, and we're going to take you to your foster home where you're going to live.
Combined with years of threats and investigations from law enforcement, Robert says Crossland and his dad took matters into their own hands.
I think that was the biggest turn for them, was me getting taken, and they were going to, like, you know what, no one's going to have this property.
Crossland was killed during the standoff after taking shots at a news helicopter and, according to witness reports, pointing a gun at law enforcement, who in turn shot Crossland.
They felt threatened, and they shot to kill. And they could have used rubber bullets, or they could have used beanbags. There's a lot of stuff that could have happened at that time, but you just never know, because you're not in that situation.
Through a Freedom of Information Act request, Michigan State Police provided this note, written by then 12-year-old Robert, trying to get his dad to surrender. We showed the note to Robert.
When you see that, does that take you back to the time and place?
A lot of emotion. I knew exactly where I was at when I wrote it. I was in the foster home, sitting on the table, writing that out and saying, Dad, give yourself up.
Roland Rahm's final moments were spent on the outskirts of Rainbow Farm, right here near this tree, where he was shot and killed by police.
I became a very angry person, just at government, at my dad, at a lot of people saying, you know what, why did this happen?
To this day, there are conflicting witness accounts as to whether or not Rahm raised his gun at police. But Rahm's son now takes more of a nuanced view and says the entire standoff is a very teachable moment.
I have talked with different people, and they said they wouldn't have shot unless the gun wasn't pulled up. So at the very end of the day, it's like, you know what, my dad and Tom could have made a different choice. And at the same time, the police could have made a different choice of they felt threatened and they shot to kill.
Dean Kuipers, author of Burning Rainbow Farm, agrees there is much blame to go around, but Kuipers also says law enforcement did not try hard enough to calm things down.
What really needed to happen was some kind of dialogue with the authorities. And I don't think that really ever effectively happened.
As for Robert, he was later adopted by his grandparents, now has a family of his own, and works at a church. There's even interest in a Rainbow Farm movie, with directors and producers reaching out.
One of the producers actually came from Ireland and came here and met me.
To this day, there is still much distrust and anger over what exactly happened. As for the Rainbow Farm property, it is now overtaken by tall grass, the once prominent stage now dilapidated and covered by trees. It's peaceful now, and Robert says he is too.
My biggest thing is, you know what, if I can get over it, so can you. That's it.
Cody Combs, News Channel 3.
Well, as for the Rainbow Farm movie, it remains to be seen when it will begin production or when it might be released. On our website, wwmt.com, as a bonus to this story, we've got never-before-seen police reports and other documents from Rainbow Farm showing exactly what
links will be in the description. And yeah, I have a lot to say about what went down over there at Rainbow Farm. And in fact, if you're interested in seeing what I have to say about that, I'll put a link to my video about it in the description below. So the activists in Michigan have always been busy, and there's always something going on. But anyway, over the years, there's been a lot of decriminalization going on in Michigan. And it's because local activists have basically done the formula that you need to do in civic, in the civic world of government to get these things done. And it's, since this article is pretty old, I think there has even been some more updates to this decriminalization, but this is pretty much covers most of it. And granted, also most of these municipalities have some kind of a police agency that made a comment or a statement at one time to the effect of, oh, we're still going to enforce the state law. So as hard as we try to do things to make it so that, we have our rights, people are trying twice as hard to take them away. So this is like I said, this came from Michigan Radio Newsroom, and this is from November of 2014. So on November 4th, voters in 5 Michigan cities voted to decriminalize marijuana possession: Berkeley, Huntington Woods, Mount Pleasant, Port Huron, and Saginaw. These are the most recent cities to do so, but decriminalizing a federally legal substance is complex. These laws leave a lot up to interpretation of the local enforcement officials. Decriminalizing marijuana began back in 1972 in Ann Arbor and has really picked up steam over the last few years. Here's an overview of the cities that have decriminalized marijuana in Michigan, when they did so, and what it means for residents and law enforcement. Ann Arbor, 1972. Starting in 1972, possession of 2 ounces or less of marijuana would yield a $5 ticket. The law came about in response to an arrest of a poet and activist, John Sinclair, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for selling 2 joints to undercover police officers. Today, the ticket is $25 and no specific amount of weed is listed in the city charter. Detroit, Flint, and Grand Rapids, 2012. Detroit's Proposal M exempts adults 21 years older from criminal prosecution for the possession of an ounce or less of marijuana. Flint's policy is similar to Detroit's, but for citizens 19 years or older. Wow. So that's pretty, that right there is one of the better decriminalization platforms. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they had 2 ounces on Flint's. But anyway, it doesn't matter because Flint police, however, were very vocal about the vote not influencing the way the police officers carried out their jobs. And as a resident of Genesee County, and Flint only being like 6 miles away, I can testify that, yeah, marijuana still dominates the docket. Grand Rapids voters approved a law that mirrors Ann Arbor's possession of marijuana is a civil infraction, similar to receiving a parking ticket. That vote is being challenged by the Kent County Prosecutor's Office in court. And I don't know how that turned out, but I don't think it turned out good for the Kent County Prosecutor. But anyway, like I said, this is an old article. All these are old. I couldn't find any updated information. I just needed some stuff to tell you about what we've already done. Lansing, Jackson, and Ferndale in 2013. Voters in Lansing, Jackson, and Ferndale all passed local decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana in November of 2013. And then we had Hazel Park, Oak Park in August of 2014. Both Hazel Park and Oak Park voted to decriminalize less than an ounce of marijuana for adults 21 and older who are on private property. I mean, I'm pretty sure at least Oak Park is in Oakland County. Maybe. Berkeley, Huntington Woods, Pleasant Ridge, Saginaw, Mount Pleasant, Port Huron in November of 2014. In the Metro Detroit communities of Berkeley and Huntington Woods, voters lifted local bans on possession of marijuana for individuals 21 years or older on private property. Pleasant Ridge voted to make marijuana a low priority for city police officials. That was another thing that people were doing back in 2014-ish, which kind of like was a, reflection of what Obama's policy was federally. That they made a bullet list of things that were on the top of the list of to enforce for the Department of Justice federally. And marijuana wasn't on the list. And that pissed a lot of right-wing, authoritarian prosecutors and judges and cops. They didn't like that. But what ended up happening was it kind of got pushed down the line, and local municipalities everywhere started adapting the language. So anyway, Saginaw voters put a new section in the city's charter that prevents elected officials from placing further restrictions on marijuana use for people 21 and up who are on private property, according to MLive. Saginaw County Sheriff William Federer-Spiel said deputies will stop citing people with minor marijuana violations. However, interim Saginaw Police Chief Robert Ruth and Saginaw County Prosecutor John McCulgan both said they did not plan on having their respective departments change how they do their jobs. Thank you very much. Whatever. And it's sad that, we're talking about Saginaw, Flint, Benton Harbor, Detroit. The cities that have the most black populations are where they're the most assholes about changing their policing policies on marijuana. I wonder why that is. Mount Pleasant voted that nothing in the city's charter would punish marijuana possession of less than an ounce, which, according to the city's public information officer, won't result in much of a change because they already do not target marijuana use. So, cool. Thank you, Mount Pleasant. From what I've heard, though, if you're on the reservation or in the parking lot of the casino, watch out. Port Huron narrowly passed a similar ordinance to Berkeley and Huntington Woods. What does all this mean? These local laws are all conflict with state and federal laws that deem marijuana use illegal. The laws are, however, symbolic of the public's increasing tolerance of marijuana use and possession. Jeff Hanks says it sends a message not only to our local politicians, but politicians at the state level that it's time to do something. And that's, yeah, that was Paige Flegger and Mark Bush from Michigan Radio Newsroom. We move from all that decriminalization to the legalization of medical marijuana in Michigan, which happened in, obviously, the November 5th election, or November election in 2008, not sure what day it was on. Voters in Michigan overwhelmingly approved medical marijuana ballot measure, making it one of a quarter of states to allow severely ill patients to use the illegal drug. So be careful with the wording by the Associated Press here. So with 87% of precincts reporting, okay, so this is still on election day. So, but this held true, 63%, or, you know, that number voted yes on Proposal 1, which removes state penalties for registered patients to buy, grow, and use small amounts of marijuana. So I don't know if whoever wrote this didn't really get that right either, but whatever the case may be, that's the two things you need to know about is that in 2008, Michigan voters approved medical marijuana, and we'll get into the language and all that stuff in a minute, but so there, you know, the approval here was 63 to like 37. So, and I like how they did that. They didn't put the 37 in number format, so it kind of gets lost in the word salad down here, in the letter salad. But it's 63 to 37. You know what that is? That's called a mandate. That's not even a blowout. That's a mandate for sure. That's a 2/3 situation. And in that situation, the law is supposed to be put to the legislator so that they can help craft it immediately. But you know what? They didn't do that. They sat on it for 8 years before the legislator decided to act on it. And we're going to get into what exactly happened with that. Now, when it comes to the medical marijuana law that was passed in 2008, the legislator and the incoming governor, Rick Snyder, and his administration, which was staffed with right-wing corporatists, including Dow Chemical anchor baby Bill Schuette, they basically came in and with a goal in mind to basically thwart the medical marijuana law that the people had just passed. And this is a little segment over on Michigan Radio from Mark Brush from February 12th, 2013, called Timeline, a short history of Michigan's medical marijuana law. And it's pretty short, and it, like it said, it only goes to 2013. So let's see what happens. First, you have the act passed right here. Why don't we see this better? Applications pour in. So as of December 31st, 2012, the state had received 344,000 applications and renewals. So they're with 124,000 active registered qualified patients and 25,000 primary caregivers. And those numbers haven't really changed. Or, well, the caregiver number did change. It went up and then down, but it's kind of leveled off at about 30,000. And then the patient number is pushing 300,000 now. Department of Justice clarifies medical marijuana policy. And this is in 2009, where they basically said they were going to take a hands-off approach to patients and dispensaries who are following their state's laws. But Livonia, in 2009, decided to pass a city ordinance effectively banning medical marijuana. And then you have medical marijuana dispensaries springing up basically all over the state. And the Department of Community Health spokesperson James McCurtis said, I know there's a lot of medical marijuana clinics throughout the state, and I know that law enforcement towns and cities are having trouble grasping what is legal and what isn't, and the law doesn't address it. And we heard this over and over. It was the mantra from basically legislators and police and people running for office on elections, is that we had this gray, all these gray areas with this law. Birmingham amends city code. And it's again saying that you can't use medical marijuana or sell it or anything like that. Bloomfield Hills becomes the third Michigan city to effectively ban medical marijuana. Confusion over the extent and the clarity of the law, and this is in September 14th of 2010. The ACLU in 2010 sues city over medical marijuana bans. In a democracy, city commissions do not have the power to veto statewide ballot initiatives after they have been approved by the voters and enacted into law, says Carrie L. Moss, ACLU Michigan Executive Director. December 6, 2010, Wyoming City Council bans sale of medical marijuana, just 5 days after the filing of the ACLU lawsuit. And then we have federal judge rules against Michigan man fired from Walmart for using medical marijuana. And if you remember, he had inoperable brain tumor, and he was like Walmart Associate of the Year in 2008, but in 2011 or 2009, maybe it was still 2008, they fired him. He took it to court, went all the way to the Supreme Court. Actually, I don't know if it went that far, but whatever the case is, sad to say that, you know, that's how it was, and it still is. You can still get fired from working at Walmart for using medical marijuana in Michigan. So basically what I'm kind of like seeing here, a pattern emerge, is court precedences are happening in Michigan for medical marijuana every year after the law was passed, and none of them were in favor of the patients. None of them were in favor of the caregivers. None of them were in favor of the dispensaries. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. There, you know, it got to the point where the state defines what a plant is, and they go after people, you know, and nitpick little plant counts. So, and then we have 2011, another bump from the Department of Justice saying they are going to take a little bit of a harder line on medical marijuana. And then in August of 2011, State Appeals Court rules against dispensary. And then in September of 2011, crackdowns and raids occur across Michigan. And that's when the dispensary raids started picking up steam. Zero tolerance driving policy upheld for medical marijuana patients. And basically another Michigan Court of Appeals decision, which basically said that people, you know, the MMMA did not override Michigan's zero tolerance for driving policy. And then we have May 27th, 2012, medical marijuana in kids. And this is when we have the story of Cooper Brown, one of the 44 medical marijuana users in the state under the age of 18. He was a 14-year-old with Dravet syndrome that uses medical marijuana to help control seizures. May 31st, 2012, doctor's diagnosis is a defense for marijuana possession charge. And that was Michigan Supreme Court. So I guess, oh boy, there's a win for us. Michigan Court of Appeals strikes down Wyoming's medical marijuana ban. So it seems that you couldn't actually ban the caregiver growing, patients growing their own weed. So there is some victories here and there, but overall, it's still, you've seen the arrest numbers. The arrest numbers don't go down, they go up, despite these rulings. Michigan Supreme Court hears Mount Pleasant dispensary case. And this is the case that comes out and makes the decision. Lansing judge, marijuana law screams for legislative clarification. And, you know, over and over, that's the mantra that we keep hearing. And then December of 2012, package of MMMA reforms signed into law. And this is 200, just a few of the Republican-controlled legislator doing extraordinary active lame duck session. Suspicious? I don't know. So, state Supreme Court says no to collective grow operations in the People versus Baalsma. Another win for the corporations, I guess. And this is way before there was ever any, you know, real regulated corporate type takeover even conceived, I think. Okay, so January 22nd, 2013, Federal Appeal Court says marijuana remains dangerous with no current accepted medical use. Who cares? Michigan Appeals Court says patients can exchange small amounts of marijuana. The court affirmed a lower court decision saying the uncompensated transfer of marijuana between patients constitutes medical use of marijuana as permitted by the MMA. So, oh boy, we can pass a joint to each other. Cool. And then finally, in February 8th of 2013, we seen the Supreme Court ruling against marijuana dispensaries. Selling medical pot can be shut down as a public nuisance as of February 8th, 2013. And believe me, a lot of them have been. Marijuana dispensaries that handle patient-to-patient sales are not protected under the state's medical pot law, according to a new ruling from the Michigan Supreme Court. The ruling, according to Michigan Attorney Bill Schuette, Attorney General, empowers county prosecutors across the state to shut down remaining dispensaries that sell marijuana on the grounds that they are a public nuisance. So remember, like I said before, Dow Chemical Company's anchor baby, Bill Schuette, hates marijuana. He hates medical marijuana. If you're going to vote for marijuana, don't vote for Bill Schuette. I don't give a shit what your if you're one of those, I'm a Republican, my parents are Republicans, my grandpa's a Republican, I don't care. Do not vote for Bill Schuette if you want to see marijuana have any kind of a chance of not getting completely taken over or stomped into the ground by Lansing. And that's not an endorsement for anything other than do not vote for Bill Schuette. And then, of course, we have this other ruling with the Carruthers versus the Court of Appeals, where they said defendant's appeal by rights of his conviction of possession of marijuana with intent to deliver following a jury trial. We remand to allow defendant to file a motion to dismiss charges against him for an evidentiary hearing to determine whether defendant can present an affirmative defense pursuant to Section 8 of the Medical Marijuana Act. We also determine as an issue of first impression that under the existing statutory scheme, an edible containing THC extract from marijuana resin is not, quote, usable marijuana under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. So there you have that. that was what made medibles essentially illegal in Michigan. You know, with people going to jail that got caught with them. Not just, oh, illegal, haha, well, I guess we'll get a little slap on the wrist and pay a fine. No. You know, this is what I don't understand about marijuana, is that there's strict laws on it, strict penalties, as if it's some kind of dangerous, it's something dangerous or something. Michigan marijuana arrest up since medical marijuana legalized. Interesting. Very interesting. Tell me more. Michigan witnessed a 17% rise in marijuana arrests between 2008 and 2014, Michigan Live reported. There are a myriad of possible reasons for this. For starters, medical marijuana is allowed, but marijuana possession and use is still a criminal offense. This is a report from MLive, posted July 31st, 2017. Marijuana is 9% of all Michigan arrests, and other facts on marijuana arrests. Marijuana arrests per 1,000 residents. Here's basically your overall look at where the most arrests happen. And it's looks like up north is not a very fun place, and it's like you got these roads that go through the Upper Peninsula that hug, you know, the closest possible route, and all them areas seem like really hard to get through without getting arrested for marijuana or whatever. I mean, I don't know. It's ridiculous. Why do we have arrests for marijuana? Well, we do, and we have thousands of them. And these statistics are ridiculous. So we're talking about usage here. They talked about the percentage of population that uses marijuana, and for some reason they put Flint and Port Huron together like it's, you know, some kind of a connection between Flint and Port Huron. There really isn't, you know. And I even bunch in this thing up here. We can just talk about Flint only, or even just Genesee County. But for some reason, they bunched in all these Lapeer and Port Huron and all this crap. So whatever, we'll go with it. And we're the number one. We use weed more than anybody else in the state. And I believe that, you know. And I've lived here most of my life, and I've lived in Wayne County most of my life too, in Detroit. Not most of my life, but for a few years, and a lot of people smoke weed there. And then you got all these Southwest Michigan, Mid-Michigan, college towns, whatever. But marijuana arrest rates, before we get to the arrests on the statistics, let's just look at where Flint stands. Number 5, even though they bunched those other places in, even though Flint uses at number 1, they are number 5 at the arrest rates. So that's kind of encouraging, I guess. But I mean, you got to consider this too. Lower Peninsula, north of Clare, I mean, Region 2, let's take a look at Region 2. The population isn't very big in Region 2, is it? Maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of there's Amish people over here, I know that. So I'm just saying, man, there's a lot of population in this swath that they call Flint, Port Huron. And as we've seen and heard from 2008 on up, the arrests don't go down, they go up. So it says right here that arrests are up 12% since 2008, but down slightly from 2013 and 14. about 64% of marijuana arrests were for possession or use, as it always is. And as a percentage of all Michigan arrests, it just keeps going up. There's, it's 7 here and it's 9.3 here at the end of this study. And as other arrests go down, marijuana is a bigger proportion. Now there's this little thing here about Michigan marijuana arrests by race and gender. And you look at it, and at first you're like, white men 50%, black men 27%. Oh, more white people get arrested for marijuana than black people. Well, you gotta like take into consideration how many people are white and how many people are black. And in Michigan, you got 81% of those arrested were men. To provide some perspective, 39% of Michigan residents are white males and 6.7% are black males. So you have almost 40% of Michigan residents are white men. And then only about 7% are black. And they're getting arrested more than half as much as white people. So bottom line, black men are 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana compared to white men, and 4 times more likely than other Michigan residents. Use by race, ethnicity. And then at least once is the blue, at least once in a lifetime. And then the orange is at least once in the last year, and the gray is last month. So if you look at black versus white, it's pretty damn much the same. So no one can say, oh, well, black people use drugs way more than white people. No, it's just not true with any drug. And in most cases, probably the opposite is true. U.S. marijuana use by gender, there's other things we can look at too. But those are the important things to note about if you're considering whether or not to legalize marijuana, which has a pretty good decriminalization package going on with it. It's not just, oh, hey, we're going to legalize weed, but if you get caught outside of the auspices of it, we're going to throw you in jail and throw away the key, put a record on you that's going to possibly compromise your future, blah, blah, blah. Just remember the arrests. That's one of the things that is the biggest deal. And medical marijuana, that didn't help. People say, oh, well, this isn't going to help either. Well, yeah, it is. It has penalties laid out right in it. And that's why if you didn't think this was going to work, why are the cops so pissed off about it? Almost every sheriff department in Michigan is against Proposal 1. So in 2015, the activists in Michigan finally put together a petition, and we had basically like the 2 competing petitions were My Legalize and the Michigan Cannabis Coalition. And then out of nowhere, a third group called the Michigan Responsibility Council pops up. So far the first 2 were kind of like the Democrats and the activists from NORML. And then the Michigan Cannabis Coalition was more like even more corporate of people that were basically just going to hand it right to the legislator and let them hammer it out. And the third group, Michigan Responsibility Council, basically wanted to take the whole thing over. They would legalize marijuana for recreational, but they would give it all to 10 bosses, or 10 of their friends, I guess. I don't know. And those people would run everything, and nobody else would be allowed to grow or do anything like that. And, nobody wanted that. And this was in 2015 when these groups began stirring the pot. And then in 2016, another group emerged called Abrogate Prohibition, which was more of the libertarian stand. That wanted this, they basically just wanted to make it so marijuana was just like tomatoes. The one that really emerged as the most successful one was My Legalize, which was like the Democrat style one that had a platform but still let the legislator work, you know, do some of the regulations or the rules or whatever. And they did churn in enough signatures, but they got screwed over by some crazy 180-day rule that nobody knew anything about until after the churn-in. And then they basically took that to the Supreme Court, and no, didn't win. And all the efforts of the activists, including me at the time, basically fell to the wayside. And then after the election of 2016, where we would have been on the ballot and it would have passed, would have barely squeaked by, I think, but it would have passed. Governor Snyder signs the Medical Marijuana Licensing of Facilities Act, which essentially, when the dispensaries and medibles, the people wanted to have some clarity on it and some laws to maybe regulate that. Lansing took 11 months to not do anything about it, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, right before the election, boom, they set this package down. And it already looked like a corporate takeover before, but then we find out that lobbyists were involved in hammering the rules out. And it's the lobbyists don't want small businesses around, and they didn't want caregivers to be able to continue supplying dispensaries with medical marijuana products. So they call a bunch of lobbyists together, and it turns out that some of these lobbyists are the same people that was like the Michigan Responsibility Council, for example. They're the people that was trying to take over the whole thing with their ballot initiative that they never really got off the ground with back here on, back in 2015 that we were just talking about. So, do you see anybody on this list that's like a caregiver or somebody that represents caregivers? Well, there's a National Patients' Rights Association, but they were going to the same lobbying firm as the Michigan Responsibility Council was. And it's like that all around the chart, So when we learned that, it was pretty cringy. What are you going to do about it? And we also learned that My Legalize, the failed petition drive from 2016, joined forces with the coalition, and it became the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, which also was joined by other organizations such as NORML in Michigan NORML, the Marijuana Law Section of the State Bar Association, the ACLU, Drug Policy Alliance, Marijuana Policy Project, and other business interests and trade organizations. Quote, "We promised the people we wouldn't stop fighting until we ended the 20,000 plus arrests for cannabis every year, legalizing hemp farming, and expanded safe access to medicine, and we directed new tax money to schools, roads, communities, veterans, and other noble cause," said attorney Jeffrey Hank, chairman of My Legalize organization. And then, of course, it was approved, and launched in May of 2017. With a goal to gather 252,000 signatures. And then, this is in April of 2018, the battle to free the weed officially started Thursday when the State Board of Canvassers ruled that the group pushing a proposal to legalize marijuana for recreational use got enough signatures to qualify for the November 6th ballot. And then here's a quote from Rick Thompson. He's in the Michigan chapter of NORML. He says, "The people of Michigan deserve this. They earned it. We've faced many trials and tribulations. We've had so many stop and go signs from the federal government. That's why states have to take the reins on the issue and really be the crucibles of democracy that we've always been intended to be." And that's where we are now. We have opposition. If you got TV, which I don't, and you're watching TV, you probably see about 20 extra weed prohibition commercials every hour now, because basically all these crazy businesses and corporations like Dow Corporation, the crazy, corporation that spawned Bill Schuette. So they're throwing $100,000 towards Healthy and Productive Michigan, which is a total shill operation. And we had Sam come into town and completely do this crazy thing where they have the NAACP coming out against Prop 1 and some black guy that sings a rap song against it. So it's just crazy what's going on with the opposition. But that's what they're spending their money on. That's what they're doing with this money, is they're just giving it to people to make stupid songs about how weed is a bad thing for you. This is ridiculous. And all these stupid commercials that I could barely even sit through. I would never want to sit through even 1 minute of those, man. We have other people that pitched in on it, like the Howarth Inc., Gordon Food Services, Lear Corporation, Two Men in a Truck. I mean, just ridiculous. And they joined DTE executives. The executives might be thinking, I don't even understand that, because it seems like they would be happy about a bunch of people with small grow operations rather than the big corporate ones that probably will go solar and shit. And all these people are giving their money to Sam and all these other people, and it's just ridiculous. So good luck, guys. No, actually, no. Fuck off, guys. We're sick of you guys. And finally, last but not least, the retired Michigan cops say legal marijuana would help police community relations. A group of retired Michigan police officers is campaigning for legal marijuana, pushing back against the majority opinion of law enforcement organizations in the state. Quote, "They want to keep it illegal because they want to be able to search any and every car or person they come in contact with by the claim that, sniff, sniff, I smell marijuana. Get out of your car or up against the wall," said Howard Woolridge, a retired detective from Bath Township Police Department who is now a federal lobbyist and a member of COPS, Citizens Opposing Prohibition. Quote, "Driving while black is still a problem in this state and across this country, and the smell of marijuana is how the hook to continue police action, which is often illegal and certainly repugnant," he said. Woldridge is one of 3 former Michigan police officers who gathered Thursday for a press call organized by a coalition to regulate marijuana like alcohol. Also in attendance was Neil Franklin, the executive director of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, retired Wayne County Sheriff's Detective and current State Senator Vincent Gregory, Democrat from Lothrop Village, and Margot Bruner, a marijuana advocate who serves on the state's Impaired Driving Safety Commission. So far, nearly every county sheriff in Michigan and a large number of county prosecutors have voiced their opposition to Proposition 1, which would legalize recreational marijuana for adults 21 and over. Police leadership organizations, Michigan Association of Chiefs Police, and Michigan Sheriff's Association have also endorsed the opposition campaign run by Healthy and Productive Michigan. The group that gathered Thursday at a law office in downtown Detroit sought to present a different narrative. Black and brown communities have long been targeted by police as they seek to make arrest quotas, and the smell of marijuana offers police an easy introduction to search a vehicle, home, or to seize property through civil asset forfeiture, Franklin said. Civil asset forfeiture, the practice by which police departments can stop and detain someone and take their cash and property, is sometimes used to fund the general operations of police departments, Franklin said. Quote, "This is a financial interest that these police and prosecutors have that they never mention to the public," Wooldridge said. "It's policing for profit." In 2016, 304 law enforcement agencies in Michigan reported receiving $12.2 million in proceeds from civil asset forfeiture. In 10% of the cases, no one was charged with the violation for which the forfeiture was authorized. Of the 4,955 cases related to controlled substances, 25% of them were marijuana related. Decades of those interactions have created mistrust between officers and the communities they serve, which make officers less effective, Nelson said. Quote, "When it comes to the relationship between police and community, namely black and brown and poor communities, this is the cornerstone for creating an opportunity to repair those relationships," Franklin said. Last week, the Detroit NAACP and several other African American community leaders voiced their opposition to Proposition 1. They argued a recreational marijuana industry wouldn't bring opportunities to people of color and that their neighborhoods would be disproportionately targeted by the industry. Healthy and Productive Michigan has also argued drug driving crashes would increase should Proposition 1 pass. Quote, "Officers have been doing this for years. It's offensive to officers working the road by saying all of a sudden they're not going to have the ability to determine if a person is impaired," said Steve Miller, a retired sergeant with the Canton Township Police Department. Quote, "The best tool for determining that is the officers themselves." A new report from the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice, where marijuana has been legal for the past 5 years, showed a number of citations for marijuana-only impairment has remained at 7% of all DUI arrests from 2014 to 2017, and that drivers in fatal crashes who tested above the legal limit of THC decreased from 2016 to 2017, the Denver Post reported. Voters will decide the fate of Proposal 1 at the polls Tuesday, November 6th. So far, opposition campaign has raised more than double the funds of the group behind the ballot initiative. And, you know, they can spin their tires all they want with their rhetoric about how bad marijuana legalization is or will be or any of that shit. And, of course, you know, I have a lot of problems with Proposition 1. And if you don't know what I've said about this proposal, I've made countless videos about it. But I will probably put all these videos together in a playlist just in case, just for historical purposes. And go ahead and go vote on Proposition 1 on Tuesday. But also make sure you vote for Dana Nessel, because she is making noise about saying that she would push the legislator to do the automatic expungements. And then we want to definitely not vote for Bill Schuette. If you vote for Bill Schuette, you just might as well kick yourself in the balls. All right, that's all I got on this. Have a nice day, and vote yes on Proposition 1.